Karl, I have just a brief question about the very last quotation on your sheet on page 2.
Right.
A miracle is, quote, not something of which we do not cognize the cause, but rather that of which we do not cognize the laws. Thus, magnetic power is no miracle, for we cognize its law, but not the cause. What does it mean for Kant to cognize the law? What is his conception of law, first of all, here in this in the case of physics, and what does it mean to cognize it? Because it's slightly puzzling to distinguish law and cause in this way, I think.
Oh. Well, I think he's thinking of the fact that there are these, universal Newtonian formulae, but like even some Newtonians or, people can ask, well, what makes the truth of these formulae possible in the actual world? And this would be kind of the in itself cause, or the ultimate material factor that underlies the law. So he makes that distinction. I think other people have made that distinction. So there's a sense in which you could say the law itself gives you a necessary relation which can be called causal in a certain sense, the phenomenal sense. But if you ask what's the ultimate ground for that law, there's another sense in which...
The noumenal cause.
Yeah, in some sense of the noumenal cause. I mean, it's tricky. Sometimes it could be just the cause that's not in our reach yet because we haven't gotten to the inner matter of matter.
For example, yeah.
Yeah, or you could just go, transcendental idealist and say, what I mean is something even, deeper than anything, Newton might have hypothesized to underlie.
Is it enough in this case, in the case of the magnet, to say simply have done experiments and know what the regularities are, and be able to predict what's going to happen when you do this, that?
I don't think so. I may be exaggerating. I remember Bob Adams made a point about the difference between Malebranche and Kant, I think, on nature and law. So I think Kant holds to a view that there's a kind of necessary connections to laws in the phenomenal realm, which is a little stronger than what you're talking about. But that's still that kind of necessary connection, which is just backed by the transcendental necessity of the second analogy and the strict universality of these laws and the counterfactuals and so forth, is still different from the nozzle stuff that Andrew was talking about.
Which is knowing the noumenal cause.
Which would be knowing the ultimate why. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
John, the microphone, yeah. For John. Thank you.
Thank you, Karl. This is an Englishman speaking up for Isaac Newton, who's appeared only as a victim in this conference so far, and a victim this afternoon of Kant's critique on the supposition that when Newton wanted a reformation of the solar system, he was relying on some kind of divine intervention. And I took Kant's position to be that really was shoddy philosophy, and it reminded me too of that first letter that Leibniz writes to Samuel Clarke, which instigates what has become known as the Leibniz-Clarke correspondence, where it seems to me Newton's position is caricatured in both ways, in the sense that although Newton did require a reformation of the solar system because friction, at least as the planets orbited the sun, would eventually cause them to slow down, he does not actually appeal to divine intervention to sort it out. He actually has natural mechanisms involving the way comets' tails, for example, passing close to the sun, may be imbibed by the sun through gravitational attraction. And that's only one of Newton's speculative hypotheses about how this reformation of the system will take place. So it's perfectly true, Newton would always leave open the possibility that there could be some divine fiat. But that, again, is just leaving open that theistic strong position. So I'm speaking rather vehemently here, and I didn't really necessarily wish to do so, but it just seemed to me there's an interesting question about where Leibniz and Kant, where are they documenting this licentious appeal to the miraculous by Newton.
No, I appreciate you saying that, and I had qualms of conscience as I read that quote. So what I was trying to get at is Kant's attitude, not the accuracy of his characterizations of Newton or the Old Testament or a lot of these other things, because I think I would start with the premise that he had nothing but the highest respect for Newton, and he was sort of in an amateur way, teaching himself the Newtonian system up there in Königsberg and relying on what my understanding wasn't the best scientific education in Europe at that time. The spirit, I think he was really trying to out Newton in a way. He was just trying to say, well, Newton tried to do it, but it seems to me, I've heard rumors that he's bringing God into it, and here I'll try to do it in a better scientific way. There is something deeper. There are passages, I know my students have pointed them out to me, having to do with the metaphysics of space and how space is connected to the being of God, and how the beginning of the Critique of Pure Reason, I think there are passages where Kant is reacting very directly to things that are in the Newton text, and I think he's got this kind of sense from way back that at some point, just as we saw earlier with Descartes and so forth, there's some of these philosophers that'll try to bring God pretty quickly into the physical world, and I think he's trying to make some distance from that, but I meant no disrespect.
Thank you. Maybe I missed something in what you just said, Karl, but going back to this last quote about a miracle is not something of which we do not cognize the cause, but that of which we do not cognize the laws. Leibniz is very explicit that some sorts of regularities, thinkable regularities, couldn't constitute, I don't know so much they couldn't constitute laws, but even if they occurred with, as it were, law-like regularity, that would still be a miracle. Now, is there some constraint on what sort of law Kant could recognize as being such that an event occurring according to it would be no miracle? I mean, suppose in our experience we found it to be the case that if any human being said, let me be now in London, they would suddenly turn up in London. Or if they said, let me be now in Chicago, they would suddenly turn up in Chicago, or something like that. Suppose that happened with total regularity. Mm-hmm. Would that be no miracle?
No, I think that I was trying to answer that maybe not adequately to Dan there, that I think Kant's working with a really strong conception of law, and has different kind of layers to it. So your case wouldn't be what he had in mind. It sounds like an interesting philosopher's example, but I think what he's got in mind is not just a strong view about individual laws as underwriting all sorts of counterfactuals and connected to the second analogy, but also the whole metaphysical principles of foundations of nature, and the idea that there are these fundamental. He talks earlier about, I had that quote about the regressive. He's got the notion that there are those first principles of nature, kind of Cartesian view, and I think he really has a systematic thought. So when he's saying there's we're talking about stuff that makes sense because it falls under laws, what he means is we're talking about stuff that fits into a really tightly organized system that even has some a priori components, that system of nature. And similarly with the morals, it's not just we got some moral principle or another like utilitarianism. We've got laws in the strictest sense that are rooted in some kind of unconditional first formula and so forth. So that's what he's thinking, I'm pretty sure.
And would these be necessary laws? Because if they're a priori necessary laws, then it might seem misguided to ask for the cause. I mean, how could they not hold?
Well, there's an ambiguity unnecessary in Kant always, I think, in
Yeah.
the theoretical philosophy, because they're necessary for experience. But then there's the deeper question of why, just like the space and time,
Okay.
what is the source of these necessities of experience? It's not the case with the moral law necessity there. So there's a difference in the two ways of doing it. It's talking about.
Well, then, does this come down, the claim here really come down to being a claim that whether something's miraculous or not is a question about how it fits in the phenomenal order and not a question about how it fits in the noumenal order?
No, that was I'm making a big, much broader hermeneutical hypothesis here. That you see, the thought is that there is this sense of law and order in the phenomenal theoretical domain, but because Kant thinks he's got a similar or maybe even tighter sense of law and order in the moral domain, therefore he thinks when he's talking about freedom, it's not a strange thing. In fact, it's even more straightforward than what's going on in the theoretical philosophy. So I start with the mystery of himself saying, well, freedom's incomprehensible and so forth. So why isn't it just weird, like miracle talk? And the hypothesis was we got the notion of nature and of law in the moral world, which parallels the explicability of things in his sort of Newtonian conception, tight Newtonian conception of the theoretical world, and therefore everything seems, as it were, in order for Kant, and therefore the thought that you'd have to really refer to specific miracles ever begins to drop out more and more as time goes on. That was the global hermeneutical hypothesis.
Andrew. Yeah.
Thanks. I just wanted to ask quickly a couple things, but the talk is really rich and has a lot to talk about. There's this place in the religion that you probably know where it looks like he gives a different account of what a miracle is than the last passage that Dan and Bob were talking about. It's in a way more puzzling. He says,
What page?
686. What is to be understood by the word miracle? They can be defined as events in the world, the causes and effects of which are absolutely unknown to us and so must remain. It just seems like, how would we know? I mean, surely we see Lazarus coming out of, I don't understand how the effects can't be known to us, but.
So you think he's thinking that in all cases the effects have to be unknown to us. That's
Yeah.
maybe he's thinking maybe it's translation. Maybe that this is an effect which is really a miraculous effect. You might know the effect, but you
Right.
might know
That
it's a
you-
miraculous
Right,
effect.
yeah, I figure that must be. But I mean, the interesting thing is here, he says the cause is absolutely unknown to us, whereas it looks like here, it's something different in the lectures.
Well, the idea of the, we don't know the causes of any miracles. It's there may be some miracles, but we don't really, on his view. We can think of them as things that work as causes, but we don't know miracles
Right,
as
but
causes.
I take it this quotation here on the handout says the miracle is not something of which we do not cognize the cause. So there I thought.
Well,
Yes,
I think what he's trying to say it's there's a sense in which I think he's thinking of the freedom thing. So again, the idea is he's thinking, look, with respect to freedom, remember he calls freedom a mystery rather than a miracle. In a sense, there's something mysterious about it because there's a sense in which you sort of know something about it, and you can say there's some kind of causality that we do have, but that doesn't remove the problem because there's still something mysterious about it. I think that's what he's
Yeah, it must mean something.
suggesting.
With respect to the related question about us knowing the moral law, and so in not really regarding those things as miracles, God's
Yeah.
interventions, isn't that a sort of equivocation on law there? I think it sounds like, what he wants to say in this recipe is we don't know the kind of metaphysical laws by which things are operating here. We don't know how God might intervene to do various things at the noumenal level, and so we don't know those laws, and so of course we do know the moral law, and that God will operate in accordance with the moral law, and that we would